The high plains beneath the San Juan Mountains had a way of swallowing sound, leaving only wind and sky behind. Out there, where the land stretched wide and stubborn and the sun baked the earth into a faded gold, the Harkin Ranch stood alone, quiet, weather-beaten, and unbothered by the march of time. The house was small, built of old pine that had grayed under countless storms. Its porch creaked even when no one walked across it, a tired sigh carried off by the wind. A long, narrow horse barn leaned slightly to the east as if the years had nudged it into surrender. The fences, once crisp and straight, were now pale and warped, rattling softly whenever the mountain gusts swept through the open range. Out here, there was nothing to drown out the lonely whistle of the wind, nothing but the chorus of coyotes at night and the restless shuffle of horses in the paddock. Abel Harkin had lived on this ridge most of his life, but never had the land felt as big as it did after the sickness took his family. It happened too fast, like most tragedies do. One winter they were all there, his father shouting across the fields, his mother humming at the stove, his younger brother racing bareback across the pasture. The next winter, Abel tended 3 graves behind the cottonwoods and learned the kind of silence that makes a man older than his years. Now he rose before dawn every day, stepping into the cool gray morning with a kind of practiced steadiness. He fed the horses, checked the water troughs, hammered loose boards, tightened sagging rails. His days passed in a rhythm as predictable as the sunrise. It wasn't the life he once imagined, but it was the life he knew how to keep alive. Folks in Dry Hollow, the small town 8 miles south, had a name for him. The quiet rancher on the ridge. Not unfriendly, just apart. A man shaped by solitude, carved out of routine and loss. Abel didn't mind the name. There were worse things to be called in the West. Still, even a quiet man notices movement in the distance. And Abel noticed her. Every few days, just as the sun bent low enough to turn the hills copper, a young Apache woman crossed the far edge of his land. She never strayed close, always kept to the outer path that skirted the creek and threaded through the tall sage. Sometimes she carried a small woven basket filled with kota or wild thyme. Sometimes she stopped by the water, kneeling to wash her hands or refill a clay jug. Other times, Abel caught only a glimpse of her braid, swinging gently as she disappeared between the junipers. Her name was Kara. He'd heard it once in town, spoken by an older rancher who traded goats with her family. Abel hadn't said anything then, but the name stuck with him, soft, short, shaped like the wind slipping through canyon walls. Kara moved with a quiet confidence, the kind born of knowing the land better than most people ever would. Her steps were light, deliberate, her posture upright, steady. There was something keen in her dark eyes, something alert and perceptive, like she could read the intentions of the wind or sense when the earth shifted beneath her feet. Abel always stayed back, never calling out or walking closer. He watched from the porch or the corral, his hands paused on a rope or brush, pretending to stay busy. She was just passing through, after all, a neighbor in the loosest sense. But every time she appeared, he found himself watching longer than he meant to. He told himself it was out of habit. Ranchers notice movement. That's just how they're built. But even Abel, with all his practiced calm, knew that wasn't the honest truth. There was something about Kara's presence that stirred a quiet ache inside him. Not longing, not exactly, but a reminder that life still existed beyond his routines. That beauty still crossed his path from time to time, even if it didn't linger. And though he never exchanged so much as a greeting with her, Abel felt a strange sense of connection. Thin as a thread, fragile as spider silk, but present all the same. Kara, for her part, always carried herself with polite distance. She never trespassed beyond the creek, never lingered more than she needed to, never gave Abel a reason to speak. But whenever her gaze happened to meet his from across the boundary, the briefest second, a flicker of recognition, something unspoken passed between them. Not familiarity, not invitation, just awareness, as if both of them knew the land was wide and loneliness was heavy, and sometimes 2 quiet souls could sense each other long before they ever said a word. And that was how it began, without fire or thunder, without a single exchanged greeting. Just a rancher who had forgotten what it felt like not to be alone, and a young Apache woman who moved through his world like a soft wind, stirring things he thought had long settled. The days rolled by slow on the ridge. each one looking almost like the last. Same dusty trails, same wind-whipped fence lines, same long shadows stretching across the land. Abel Harkin had grown used to that kind of sameness. It made the loneliness manageable, predictable, safe. But then Kara started appearing more often, and the quiet rhythm of Harkin Ranch began to shift in small, barely noticeable ways. It happened one bright morning, the kind where the sky looked washed clean after a rare night of light rain. Abel was checking the hinges on the north gate when he heard hooves approaching, soft, measured, almost cautious. He looked up to see Kara riding toward the fence line on a small bay mare, the animal favoring its right foreleg. Kara didn't call out. She simply stopped at the boundary, lifted one hand gently, and waited for Abel to walk over. Her eyes were steady, respectful, never assuming, never demanding. "My horse," she said quietly. "She stepped wrong on the rocks. Could you look?" Her words were simple, clipped in the way Apache speech tended to be, efficient, unadorned. Abel nodded once, grabbed a halter, and stepped through the fence. He crouched beside the mare, running a calloused hand along the leg until he found the swelling. Kara stood nearby, silent but watchful, her braid brushing the shoulder of her doe-skin top each time the breeze shifted. "It's just a bruise," Abel said, tightening the wrap. "Keep her off the rough ground for a few days." Kara exhaled softly, a sound that might have been relief. "Thank you." That should have been the end of it. But she didn't leave right away. Instead, she asked, "How's your waterline holding?" The wind was strong last night. Short conversations followed. Nothing deep, nothing bold, just small threads of connection. They talked about the year's stubborn drought, about the disappearance of mule deer tracks around the creek, about the frost arriving earlier than usual. Kara never wasted breath on long sentences. Abel, in turn, answered in his slow, measured drawl, choosing words like he was weighing each one in his palm. And yet, when they stood close enough for their shadows to brush, time felt different, softer, as if the world paused just long enough for two guarded souls to notice each other. Over the next week, she stopped by again, twice, then again, sometimes with a question about the soil near her family's garden, sometimes with dried herbs for his horses, sometimes just passing through, offering a small nod, a faint smile, or a simple morning. Abel found himself listening for her footsteps on the creek stones before he even realized he was doing it. Kara carried herself with the quiet resilience of someone who'd grown up relying on the land more than on people. Her family scraped by in a small shelter near the foothills, wood, hide, and whatever they could gather. Her mother was ill, often bedridden. They had little, and what they owned showed it. Patch blankets, a single aging mare, and baskets filled with herbs Kara picked from the hillsides. But Kara herself, she moved through the world like she belonged to the wind. Quick, alert, graceful in that understated Apache way. She knew the hills like others know the layout of their kitchens, knew how to read tracks, how to listen to the river, how to sense a storm long before the clouds announced it. Abel admired that, maybe more than he should. Still, he kept a careful distance. Old habits, old walls. Then one afternoon, as the sun burned low and turned the whole ridge into a canvas of copper and rose-colored dust, a small group of ranchers rode up the trail toward Harkin Ranch. They were heading out to check the northern creek. Its flow had dropped dangerously after the long drought, and folks worried the water source might be shifting. Kara was with them, reins in hand, her posture straight, eyes serious. When she reached Abel, she spoke softly but with a quiet insistence. "You should come. You know the land up there better than any of them." Abel hesitated. He had chores waiting, horses to tend, fences to mend. But when Kara's eyes lifted toward him, steady, dark, unwavering, something inside him shifted. It wasn't pressure, it wasn't expectation, it was trust, and something else he didn't dare name. Abel finally gave a short nod. "All right," he said, clearing his throat. "I'll saddle up." Kara's expression didn't change much, but Abel caught the small flicker in her gaze, a glimmer of gratitude that struck deeper than any words she could have spoken. The group rode out minutes later, dust rising behind them as they headed toward the northern hills. A simple trip to check the waterline, nothing more. At least that's what everyone believed. But for Abel Harkin and the quiet Apache girl riding just ahead of him, it was the first step towards something neither of them could foresee. A trail that would lead them straight into the heart of danger and closer to each other than either had ever dared imagine. The trail toward the northern creek wound through a stretch of land that was harsher and rockier than the ridge around the ranches. Loose shale scattered beneath the horses' hooves. Tall, jagged stones jutted out of the earth like the ribs of some long-dead beast. The sky above the San Juan Mountains, usually a bright, endless blue, had begun to bruise over, darkening into a slate-colored warning. The group rode in a loose formation, their silhouettes long and wavering in the fading afternoon light. Abel kept his mare steady, matching Kara's pace. She rode in front, her posture straight, the wind-tugging strands of black hair loose from her braid. Even in the early rumblings of danger, she looked calm, alert but unshaken. But Abel felt something in the air, a weight, a vibration, a sense that the land itself was holding its breath. The wind shifted abruptly, coming down from the mountains with a hard, cutting edge. It slapped against their coats and carried the heavy scent of rain, earthy, metallic, thick enough to taste. Overhead, clouds massed quickly, pulling together like a giant dark blanket smothering the peaks. He nudged his mare closer to Kara. "You feel that?" he asked, his voice low. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. "Yeah," Kara murmured. "Storm's rolling down fast." Up ahead, one of the older ranchers tried to coax his skittish gelding forward, but the horse tossed its head and snorted, hooves stamping the dirt anxiously. The rest of the animals shifted uneasily, ears flicking, sides quivering. Horses always sensed trouble before men did. Kara slowed her pace, scanning the sky, the rocks, the wind. Her instincts were razor sharp, finely tuned from years of reading the land the way other folks read newspaper print. Finally she spoke, her voice quiet but certain. "Bojen Hanqua, we should turn back." Abel nodded. His gut said the same thing. A San Juan storm wasn't something to argue with. Those mountains spat out tempests so fierce they could shred a man's sense of direction, drown out his own thoughts, and swallow entire trails in minutes. But not everyone was listening. One man, the same jittery fellow who joined the group at the last minute, seemed determined to keep pushing forward. He kicked his horse harder, ignoring the animal's confusion, and shouted over his shoulder, "It's just a bit of rain. The creek's less than a mile. Don't be soft." Kara narrowed her eyes. "He's a fool." Abel agreed silently. Then the sky cracked open. A bolt of lightning tore across the clouds, lighting the ridge in a violent white flash. The thunder followed instantly, sharp, booming, loud enough to rattle rib cages. Horses bolted. The gelding reared. Someone shouted. The tight-knit group turned chaotic in a heartbeat. Abel grabbed his reins, steadying his mare. But the storm hit with a ferocity he hadn't expected. Wind slammed into them, spiraling dust and grit through the air. The rain came next, first as heavy drops, then as a sharp, slashing downpour that blurred the landscape into shadows and moving shapes. "Kara!" Abel shouted, looking through the sheet of rain. She was still on her horse, but just barely. Her mare had begun to panic, nostrils flaring, muscles bunching beneath soaked hide. Suddenly, the jittery man's horse spooked violently. The man screamed, dropped his reins, and bolted on foot, stumbling between boulders as if demons chased him. "Hey!" Abel yelled after him. "Get back here. Stay with the group." But the man didn't even glance back. He vanished into the storm haze, swallowed whole by the gray, roaring wall of rain. Within seconds, the rest of the group scattered, driven by frightened horses, blinding rain, and instinctual fear. Hoofbeats pounded in every direction, fading fast. Voices rose, then disappeared. Trails split. Choices became panicked guesses. And then there were only two, Abel and Kara. Their horses huddled close, pressed together by fear and instinct. The storm raged around them, turning the world into a deafening blur. Kara gripped her reins, water streaming down her face, her jaw set with stubborn resolve. "We can't stay here," she shouted over the thunder. "We need to find higher ground." Abel nodded again, rain stinging his eyes. "Stay next to me." There was no trail left, no sign of the others, no safe direction. Just the two of them, alone in the jaws of a mountain storm that cared nothing for human lives. And there was no turning back now. This storm wasn't just weather. It was the beginning of everything that would follow. The storm roared across the rocks like a living thing, twisting through the ravines and cracks with a fierce, wild howl. Rain hammered down in sharp, icy sheets, washing dirt and grit across the ground until the trail vanished completely. Abel and Kara pushed forward on foot now, leading their frantic horses by the reins, trying to navigate the chaos with nothing but instinct and stubborn will. The land beneath them had turned treacherous. Slick stones, shifting mud, jagged ridges half hidden by the storm. The wind came in violent bursts, forcing them to brace themselves with each step. Lightning flared again, painting the canyon walls in stark white for a heartbeat, then dropping everything back into darkness. "Watch your footing!" Abel shouted over the roar. Kara nodded, hair soaked and plastered against her face. Even drenched, even shaking from the cold, she moved with that alert precision she always had. Light on her feet, cautious, reading the ground like a seasoned tracker. But even the sharpest eyes couldn't see everything in a storm like this. A chunk of rock loosened above them. It tumbled down with a grinding rumble, smashing into a tall cactus near Kara's side. She instinctively stepped back to avoid the falling debris, and that single step changed everything. From beneath the collapsing cactus, a rattlesnake, angry, startled, coiled tight, sprang forward like a whip. Abel heard the sound before he saw the strike. That unmistakable rattling buzz, sharp and venomous, cutting through the thunder. Kara jerked, gasped, a short, harsh breath ripped from her lungs. "Kara!" Abel lunged toward her. She staggered back, one hand gripping her thigh just above the knee. Even through the rain, Abel saw the red spreading fast, dark and angry, as if the storm itself had sunk fangs into her. She tried to steady herself, but her leg buckled. Abel reached her just in time, catching her under the arms as she collapsed to one knee. The rattlesnake vanished as quickly as it had appeared, slipping into the rocks, its job done. Kara pressed her lips together, refusing to cry out, but her breath came in sharp, shaky bursts, and her eyes glossed with pain. Abel saw the bite immediately, 2 deep punctures, already swelling, already turning the surrounding skin a sickly shade. Blood mixed with rainwater, running down her leg in dark streaks. The venom was working fast. Behind them, the man who had run from the storm, the jittery one, caught sight of the snake's attack. Instead of helping, he screamed, dropped his reins and bolted in blind terror, vanishing into the storm-swirled shadows without a backward look. "Coward!" Abel shouted after him, but the wind swallowed his voice. It didn't matter, that man wouldn't return. It was just him and Kara now. Kara's breaths were coming faster, turning ragged. Her hands trembled as she braced herself against a boulder, trying and failing to stay upright. Abel crouched before her, his voice low but urgent. "Kara, stay with me. Let me see it." She looked at him through the rain, eyes fierce despite the pain, determined even with poison burning through her veins. And she said the words with a steady, commanding force. "You have to suck the venom. If you don't, I'll die before sunrise." Abel froze only for a second, not out of hesitation, out of the weight of the moment. This wasn't a simple wound. This was life or death pressed into his hands, forced upon him by fate and lightning and rattling fangs. "I'm going to help you," he said, voice rough. Kara didn't argue. She simply nodded once, jaw clenched tight, the rain dripping from her lashes like tears she refused to let fall. Abel tore the buckskin fabric at her thigh with his bare hands, soft leather ripping beneath the strength of a rancher who spent his life hauling fence posts and taming horses. The tear exposed the swollen flesh, the angry red spreading outward like wildfire. Rain pounded on his back as he knelt. His hands, hard, weathered, calloused, held her thigh steady, fingers firm but gentle. Kara sucked in a sharp breath at the contact. Pain rolled through her, but she forced herself not to pull away. Abel bent down, put his mouth to the wound, and drew the venom out with desperate force, spitting it into the dirt, then going back again. Over and over. The taste was bitter, metallic, burning his tongue. The storm lashed at them both, thunder shaking the stones beneath their feet. Kara pressed her forehead against the rock, breathing in short, broken gasps. Her hand found Abel's shoulder, not pulling him closer, not pushing him away, just grounding herself in the only solid thing she had left. In that brutal moment, in the heart of the storm, every wall between them broke. There was no rancher and Apache girl, no boundaries, no distance, only survival. Only them. When Abel finally pulled back, chest heaving, rain streaming down his face, he looked up at her with fierce determination. "You're not dying today," he said. And from that instant on, they were bound, not by choice, not by fate alone, But by a moment so raw and unforgiving, it turned them into allies for life. The storm showed no sign of mercy. Rain pounded the canyon in violent waves, and thunder cracked so close it felt as if the mountains themselves were splitting open. Abel could barely see more than a few feet ahead, only shifting shadows, slick stone, and the trembling silhouette of Kara leaning into him as her strength drained away. Her breathing had turned shallow, ragged. Every few steps her knees buckled, forcing Abel to tighten his grip around her waist. The venom, the cold, the rain, it was all working against her. "We need shelter," he muttered, voice hoarse from the storm. He scanned the rock walls through the downpour, searching for anything. An overhang, a ledge, a hollow. Lightning flashed again, illuminating the jagged canyon like a fleeting map. And in that heartbeat of white light, Abel saw it. A narrow crevice, half hidden by a fallen boulder. Just wide enough for two people if they pressed in close. "Hold on," he whispered to Kara. She didn't answer. Her lips pressed tight, her face pale beneath the storm's fury. Her body trembled uncontrollably as she clung to his shoulder. Abel scooped her into his arms, not gently but firmly, with the strength of a man used to carrying feed sacks and wounded animals through rough terrain. She weighed less than he expected, her soaked buckskin clothes clinging to her like a second skin. The cold had seeped deep into her bones. He half carried, half stumbled toward the crevice, shielding her from the wind as best he could. The mouth of the rock shelter was barely a slit, but once he turned sideways and squeezed through with her in his arms, they entered a cramped, shadowy hollow just large enough to crouch in. It wasn't warm, it wasn't safe, but it was dry. And in a storm like this, that was a blessing from heaven. Abel lowered Kara gently to the ground. Her head sagged forward until he caught her chin, lifting her face toward him. "Kara," he said softly, "stay awake." Her voice was a whisper, thin, fragile. "Don't let me sleep." Her eyelids fluttered with exhaustion. Fear pricked at Abel's chest. Sharp, immediate. If she slipped into unconsciousness, she might not wake. He stripped off his heavy leather coat, wet around the edges but still warm inside, and wrapped it around her shoulders. Then he pulled her close, letting her lean against his chest so his body heat could reach her faster. The storm outside crashed and screamed, but inside the crevice it became a muffled roar, like listening to the world then from behind a wall. Kara shivered violently, every tremor shaking her through Abel's arms. "You're freezing," he murmured. She managed a faint breath that might have been a laugh. "You think?" He held her tighter. Minutes passed. Slow, aching minutes filled with thunder and rain and the fragile rhythm of Kara's breathing against him. Then softly, like someone speaking into a confessional, she began to talk. "People don't look at me the way they look at others," she murmured. "Not in town, not anywhere." Abel stayed quiet, letting her words come. "They see an Apache girl. Too young, too wild, too different." Her voice cracked on the last word. "They think I don't understand things. But I do. I understand more than they know." Lightning flickered outside, briefly lighting the sadness in her eyes. Abel swallowed hard. "They're wrong about you." Kara shook her head weakly. "I'm used to being dismissed, ignored, pushed aside." Her breath hitched. "Sometimes I wonder if people even want me here at all." Abel tightened his hold on her, the protectiveness rising inside him like a tide. "I do," he said, voice low and certain. "I'm glad you're here, more than you know." She looked up at him then. Really looked. Despite the cold and pain, her eyes held a softness he had never seen in her. A fragile vulnerability that felt rare, precious. "What about you?" she whispered. "You live out here alone. Why?" He exhaled, the truth heavy but ready. "Because I didn't know how to be around people anymore," he said slowly. "After my family passed, the quiet felt safer than the company. The horses don't ask questions. The land doesn't judge." Kara listened, silent, absorbing every word. Abel continued, voice rough. "But you showing up on that boundary line? I don't know. It woke something up I thought was gone." Kara's hand, small, warm despite everything, lifted and pressed lightly against his chest, just above his heart. She wasn't flirting. She wasn't reaching for affection. She was grounding herself, finding the steady beat of his heartbeat beneath her palm, trusting it to keep her from slipping away. Neither of them said another word. They didn't need to. Outside, the storm raged on, merciless and deafening. But in that cramped, hidden crevice, two hearts that had spent years closed off finally opened, just enough for warmth to slip in. In that quiet moment, raw, fragile, unspoken, became the true heart of their story. When dawn finally touched the canyon, it came gently, like a shy visitor unsure if it was welcome after the night's violence. The storm had spent itself hours earlier, leaving behind a world washed raw and trembling. The rocks still glistened with leftover rain. The earth released that rich, heavy scent of fresh mud and broken sage. The air felt cool, almost tender, as if trying to make up for what the night had taken. Abel blinked against the pale morning glow filtering into the narrow crevice. His back ached from spending the night half upright, keeping Kara close against him to share warmth. Her head rested on his shoulder now, her breath shallow but steady. The feverish tremors had eased. Her skin no longer felt icy, though the venom's shadow still lingered beneath her exhaustion. He brushed a damp strand of hair from her face. "Kara," he whispered, "morning's here." She stirred, eyelids fluttering before slowly opening. Her gaze was weak but aware, a small but precious victory after everything they had survived. "Still alive," she murmured. Abel let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "Yeah, you are." For a moment, neither moved. The world outside was quiet except for the distant drip of water sliding down canyon walls. It felt like a fragile peace, thin, temporary, but real enough to breathe in. But they weren't out of danger yet. Abel eased Kara upright and shifted toward the mouth of the crevice. "We need to signal the search party. Folks will be out looking." The canyon stretched before them, rugged, open, washed in the ghostly gold of daybreak. Abel stepped into the open, lifted a thick branch nearby, and jammed it upright between two rocks. Then he removed the red cloth from his saddlebag, the brightest thing he carried, and tied it to the top so it fluttered in the newborn wind. It wasn't much, but out here color meant hope. Kara leaned weakly against the stone wall, her head tipping onto Abel's shoulder when he returned. She didn't seem to notice she'd done it, or maybe she did, and didn't care. Her body was drained, her spirit thinned by pain, but she trusted him enough to give in to the exhaustion. "You rest," Abel murmured. "I'll keep watch." But she shook her head faintly. "No, if I sleep too long, I might not wake." Her voice was soft, raspy, but stubborn in that quiet Apache way he had grown to admire. Abel knelt beside her, steadying her with a hand behind her back. "Then you lean on me." She did. Minutes stretched. The wind grew warmer. Somewhere far off, the canyon carried faint, rhythmic sounds. Soft, hollow thuds, spaced evenly like a heartbeat. Kara's fingers tightened slightly on Abel's sleeve. "Horses." Abel listened. There it was again, hoofbeats echoing down the stone corridors of the canyon, coming closer with each second. "They're looking," Abel said, hope rising in his chest. He dragged a handful of dry dead brush from the crevice's edge and struck flint until a small flame caught. It burned weakly at first, then flared brighter as he fed it more fuel. Smoke spiraled upward in a silver thread against the pale sky. "Here," he called, though his voice was swallowed by the canyon walls. Kara watched the smoke curl upward, her eyes glassy with exhaustion. "Good," she whispered. "Someone will see it." And someone did. Within minutes, shapes emerged through the canyon mist. 4 riders, their outlines growing clearer as they approached. One of them shouted, pointing toward the red cloth whipping in the wind. The others broke into a trot. Relief washed over Abel so powerfully his knees nearly buckled. When the riders reached the crevice, they dismounted in a rush. "Abel, Kara, Lord Almighty, you're alive!" Hands reached for Kara, lifting her carefully. She groaned softly but didn't resist. Her body sagged, worn beyond its limits. As they wrapped a blanket around her, she suddenly twisted, reaching back. Her hand found Abel's wrist, gripping, desperate, meaningful. Her voice was barely audible, but every word struck like thunder in his chest. "You were there, so I wasn't afraid." The rescuers helped her onto a horse. She kept her gaze locked on Abel, even when they started moving, even when distance grew between them. Abel stood rooted in the canyon floor, watching until the riders vanished around a bend, carrying Kara toward safety, toward care, away from him. The storm had ended. Morning light washed the world clean. But Abel Harkin felt heavier than he had the night before. He had risked everything for her, and somewhere deep in his chest he knew the truth. He wasn't ready to let her go. The days after the storm settled into a strange, uneasy quiet on Harkin Ranch. The sky cleared, the earth dried, and the winds returned to their usual wandering whisper. Everything looked the same, yet nothing felt the same. Abel Harkin threw himself into work the way a man does when he's trying not to think. He fixed the eastern fence line where last winter's snow had bowed the rails. He mucked out the stalls, sharpened tools, spread feed, trimmed hooves. Every task was done with rugged precision, his hands moving out of habit even as his mind drifted far from the chores. At night, he lay in his small, weathered cabin listening to the roof creak and the coyotes cry in the valley. But in those sleepless hours, one sound haunted him more than the rest. The memory of rain drumming against rock and Kara's faint breath warming his chest. He would close his eyes and feel again the weight of her leaning into him in that narrow crevice. The tremble of her fingers when they pressed to his heart. The softness in her voice when she whispered, "Don't let me sleep." The storm might have passed, but what it left behind inside Abel felt like thunder still rolling through a canyon. He tried to shake it, tried to convince himself it had only been the pressure of danger, the raw edge of survival tying two strangers together. But every time he drew breath, something in him answered back. You don't hold someone like that and walk away unchanged. Still, Abel didn't go to see her, not even once. He thought about it more than he'd admit to anyone. He'd pause at the porch steps, hands shoved deep into his pockets, staring in the direction of the Apache settlement where Kara lived with her mother. His boots would angle toward the path as if deciding for him. But then he'd stiffen, shake his head and turn away. It wasn't fear of her, it was fear of everything around her. Dry Hollow could talk a place to death faster than a drought. Folks didn't always look kindly on Apache families. And if he rode up there asking about Kara, especially after she'd been found half-poisoned with him at her side, there'd be whispers, misunderstandings, judgments he didn't want falling on her or her already struggling family. He imagined her mother, weary from illness, watching him with guarded eyes. He imagined neighbors asking questions with sharp meanings hidden underneath. And worst of all, he imagined the truth in his own chest, wild and unsteady, being seen too clearly. So Abel stayed away. He mended fences, brushed his horses, patched the roof, split wood, anything to keep his hands busy. But his mind kept drifting back to the storm, to the canyon, to the girl who trusted him with her life. Kara. Her name carried an ache he didn't know how to quiet. Days passed, then a week, then more. And just when Abel thought maybe she'd forgotten him, maybe she'd healed and moved on, he found something. It was early morning, the kind where the world feels half awake and the sun is still stretching across the ridges. Abel walked the fence line with a bucket of nails, planning to reinforce a loose rail. That's when he saw it. At the edge of his property, right where the dust met the grass, were tracks. Soft, light, deliberate, smaller than any rancher's boot, too delicate to belong to a grown man, and too familiar for him not to recognize. Kara had been there, not at his door, not calling his name, just leaving silent proof she'd come as close as she dared. Abel crouched down, fingertips brushing the faint imprint of her step. The sand still held the shape of her toes, the graceful curve of someone who moved like part of the earth itself. She had come in the dawn or maybe at dusk, when shadows were long and the world felt safer. She had stood there close enough to see his barn door, close enough to hear the horses shifting, but not close enough for him to see her. She had come and gone. The tracks told a whole story. She remembered what happened in the storm. She wondered about him. She worried maybe, or missed him, or was simply trying to understand the strange pull between them. Abel rose slowly, the morning breeze tugging at his shirt, the world heavy with unsaid words. Two people thinking of each other. Two people held back by fear, by pride, by the tight knots of circumstance, and neither had spoken a word. As the sun climbed higher, Abel stood alone beside the fence, staring at the fading footprints of a girl he couldn't forget. The ranch felt emptier than ever. The morning light came slow and dusty across Harkin Ranch, spreading over the fields like warm butter melting on old bread. Abel stepped out onto the porch with a half-tired yawn, expecting another day like all the others. Quiet, predictable, lonely. He headed toward the barn to check the horses, boots crunching over dry earth, still marked faintly with the footprints he'd found days before. But this time there was something else waiting for him. As he pulled open the barn door, a small slip of folded paper fluttered down from the latch like a timid bird. Abel froze. Paper didn't blow around out here, unless someone put it there. He bent down, lifted it, and unfolded it with careful, weathered fingers. The handwriting was neat, short, precise. "If you are free, the Northern Creek needs checking again. I will wait by the fence. Kara." Abel stared at the note longer than needed, long enough for a flicker of warmth to bloom low in his chest. The letters were simple, but the meaning behind them felt heavy, tender, deliberate. She had walked onto his land again, close enough to the barn door. Close enough to leave this. Close enough to hope he would come. He read the note once more, then let out a slow breath. "Damn," he muttered softly, half a smile pulling at the corner of his mouth. "She's braver than I am." He didn't bother finishing his morning chores. Not today. Not when someone like Kara was waiting. He saddled his mare with hands that moved just slightly too fast, just slightly unsteady. His heart thumped hard under his shirt, betraying the calm face he tried to keep. By the time he rode toward the boundary fence, the sun was full on the ridge, throwing long, golden streaks across the sagebrush. And there she was. Got him. Standing alone by the wooden fence, leaning lightly against one of the posts. Her braid hung long down her back, woven tight and decorated with a single string of beads that caught the morning light. She wasn't dressed for hunting or for climbing the hills. No heavy satchel, no bow, no herbs tied at her waist. Today she looked softer, almost shy. When she lifted her eyes to Abel, something inside him stumbled. Gone was the fierce, unshakable girl who navigated storms and rattlesnakes with steady breath. Before him stood a young woman who looked like she was waiting on a hope she wasn't sure she should have. Abel dismounted slowly, afraid any sudden movement might break the fragile air around them. "You got my note," she said, voice gentle. "Yeah," Abel answered, boots sinking lightly into the dust. "Hard thing to ignore." A small smile ghosted across her lips. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence wasn't awkward this time. It felt full, expectant, warm like the rising sun. Kara was the one who broke it. "You saved my life," she said simply. No drama, no hesitation, just the truth. Abel swallowed. "You're the one who kept fighting. No." She shook her head, her braids sliding forward over her shoulder. "If you hadn't been there, I wouldn't be standing here now." Abel opened his mouth, then closed it. Words felt too big in his throat. Kara glanced at the ground, then back at him. "I wanted to thank you, in person. Not with people watching, not with whispers." She paused. "Just us." Her vulnerability was a quiet thing, like a deer stepping close enough to touch, trusting you not to move too fast. Abel took a slow breath. His voice came low and rough. "You think I saved you," he said, meeting her eyes. "But you did something for me, too." Kara blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" "You pulled me out of a place I've been stuck in for years." His thumb brushed the edge of her note, still tucked in his hand. "You made me feel something I thought I'd lost." Kara's breath caught, just a tiny inhale, soft but unmistakable. For a long moment, the wind was the only thing that spoke, rustling her braid, stirring Abel's shirt, weaving around them like a blessing. There were no declarations, no promises, no reckless confessions, just truth, raw, unguarded truth hanging in the quiet morning between them. Kara stepped closer, only half a foot, but it felt like crossing a canyon. And Abel didn't step back. Not this time. The space between them wasn't forbidden anymore. It wasn't dangerous. It wasn't uncertain. It was honest. For the first time since the storm, since the crevice, since their breaths mingled in the dark, they stood face to face without fear. And nothing about the air between them felt like distance anymore. The trail along the northern creek glistened with the freshness that only comes after a hard western storm. The world looked scrubbed clean, sage leaves washed silver, cottonwoods dripping bright droplets into the soil, and the creek itself running clear and fast, as if eager to prove it had survived the chaos of the night. Kara walked beside Abel, her steps light but slower than usual. She still carried the faint weakness left behind by venom and fever. Abel noticed every wobble, every soft inhale, every time her hand brushed the bark of a tree for balance, and every time she slowed, he slowed with her. They didn't speak much at first. The morning sun filtered through the leaves, warm and gentle on their backs. Birds returned to the branches, shaking rainwater from their feathers. The land felt alive again, reborn, vibrant, humming. Kara's braids swung softly as she moved, beads catching the sunlight with shy flashes of color. Abel kept stealing glances, quiet, careful, but unhidden. He couldn't help it. Something inside him pulled toward her like a wound toward warmth. Kara didn't look at him at first. She seemed focused on the creek, dipping her fingers in the cold water, testing its clarity, its depth, its flow. But Abel caught the small, quick smile that tugged at her lips when he extended a hand to steady her over a slippery patch of moss. She didn't need the help, but she didn't refuse it either. A soft breeze rippled through the canyon. The two walked, listening to the sound of water skipping over rocks, letting the land fill the quiet between them. But quiet couldn't hide memory. Not after what they'd lived through. At one point, as they crossed a fallen log, Abel's fingers brushed hers, just barely. Yet the touch felt like a spark thrown into dry grass. Kara paused. Abel did too. They looked at each other. Really looked. And the storm night rushed back in both their eyes. The cramped crevice, the trembling breath, the warmth of bodies pressed close. Her hand on his chest, his arms around her. Kara's cheeks warmed, a faint flush rising under her sun-kissed skin. She turned away first, but not far enough to hide the small, teasing curve of her mouth. "Don't look at me like you did that night," she said softly. Abel's breath caught. His voice came low, honest, almost rough. "I don't know how else to look at you." Kara froze. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to narrow. Just the two of them. The sound of the creek, the warmth of the sun, and the unspoken truth hanging between their breasts. Her eyes softened, unsure yet drawn. Abel, but he didn't step closer, and she didn't step back. They simply stood, caught in a space too fragile to name. Kara recovered first, brushing a loose hair behind her ear and walking forward. Abel followed, but now the distance between them felt charged, almost visible, like a thin line of lightning stretching from his chest to hers. They kept walking. The trail narrowed, forcing them closer, shoulders nearly touching. Abel watched her from the corner of his eye, admiring the way she read the land, how she paused at animal tracks, how she listened to the wind, how she touched the leaves with reverence instead of haste. Kara noticed him watching. "You're quiet today," she said gently. "I'm always quiet." She smiled. "Not with me." Abel didn't answer, but she was right. Something about her made speaking easier, made breathing easier, made solitude feel less like a habit and more like a choice he didn't want anymore. They reached the part of the creek where the banks widened into a small pool. Kara crouched down, dipping her hand in the cold water. Abel watched the reflection of sunlight dance across her fingers. When she stood, she swayed ever so slightly, and Abel instinctively reached out. His hand hovered near her waist, not touching, but close enough to feel the heat of her skin through the buckskin. Kara's eyes flicked to his hand. She didn't push it away, but she didn't pull it closer either. The unspoken boundary lay between them, thin, trembling, and growing fainter every minute they spent together. Abel finally lowered his hand, stepping back just a fraction. Kara exhaled, a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Neither spoke. The creek, the wind, the birds, they filled the silence with gentle insistence. And yet beneath the calm, something far more powerful throbbed quietly between them. A bond still raw, still forming, still waiting for the right moment to speak. When they turned to head back toward the ridge, the sun shone warm on their backs. They didn't hold hands, they didn't embrace, they didn't confess anything. But with every step, the line they'd been afraid to cross blurred just a little more. The sun was sinking low when Kara made her way to the barn, her steps slow, steady, and thoughtful. The storm-cleaned sky glowed with that burnished gold only a western sunset could make. Soft, dust-warmed light stretching long shadows across the ranch yard. She stopped in the barn doorway, one hand resting on the weathered wood as the evening breeze brushed against her cheeks. The air carried the scent of sage and healing herbs she'd hung to dry earlier. Horses shifted gently inside, rustling the hay in patient rhythm, their silhouettes warm in the dim amber glow. Kara looked small against the great sky, yet strong, sun-browned, clear-eyed, her braid moving lightly in the wind. She wasn't just a neighbor girl anymore, not just the Apache young woman he once helped. She was something rooted now, something brave, something steady. Behind her, the last streaks of sunlight caught her cheekbones and warmed her skin. turning her into a quiet ember against the dusk. She waited, because she knew Abel would come, and he did. Abel stepped out from the path behind the corral, his boots kicking up little clouds of dust. His shoulders were tired from the long day, but his eyes softened the moment he saw her standing there, framed by sunset and cedar wood, looking as if she belonged in that very doorway. "Didn't think you'd still be out here," he said quietly. "I was waiting," she replied, not turning away from the horses, but not hiding her words either. Abel paused, surprised by the directness, but he didn't interrupt. Kara wasn't someone who spoke without reason. She finally looked at him fully, lifting her chin with that calm, fearless strength that always made his heart tighten. "Abel," she said, voice amber soft, "you don't have to live alone anymore." She let the words settle, carried by the warm twilight air. "Not when I'm still here." Abel stopped breathing for a moment. Of all the things he had prepared himself to hear, that wasn't one of them. Not spoken so simply, not wrapped in truth, not with her eyes steady on his like she was offering him the whole world and trusting him not to break it. He stepped closer, slow, careful, as if approaching a wild but willing creature. His boots crunched on the barn's sandy floor. He reached for her hand with a hesitation that wasn't fear, but respect. A man who had carried loneliness for too long, setting it down gently so it wouldn't spook her. His fingers brushed hers first, barely there, a shy spark. Then with a breath like a quiet surrender, he let his hand close around hers fully. Not a rush, not a desperate grab, just the kind of touch born from weeks of unspoken truth. Her fingers curled back, warm and sure. He didn't speak. Not yet. Abel was a man slow with his heart, even when it beat loud enough to drown out the wind. He studied her face, the soft determination, the wind-touched hair, the quiet fire in her dark eyes. "Kara," he finally said, low and rough with emotion, I'm not used to someone choosing to stay." She stepped closer until they were only inches apart. "Then you'll learn," she whispered, "and with me." The horses shifted again, their gentle sounds blending with the chirring of crickets and the distant rush of the creek. Everything felt suspended, the barn, the land, the fading sky, as if the west itself held its breath for them. Abel lifted his free hand and touched her cheek with the back of his fingers, a touch so tender it felt like a promise. Kara leaned into it, not much, just enough to let him know she wanted it, wanted him, wanted this new beginning. For the first time in many cold, empty years, Abel smiled, a quiet, real, sun-warmed smile that reached his eyes. "You're good for this place," he murmured. "Good for me." Kara squeezed his hand. "Then let me stay." He didn't answer with words. He stepped closer and rested his forehead lightly against hers. Two breaths mingling, two lives finally touching without fear. And in that small, fragile, powerful moment, everything changed. No grand declarations, no rushed kiss, just two souls choosing the same direction, choosing home. As the last band of gold slipped behind the hills, a hush fell over the land. Out here in this wild, wide west, the narrator might say, two hearts that once wandered alone finally found their place to return to.